Well, today we're going to talk about ourselves and how maybe something that contributes to some of the chaos or stress that we feel in our day to day is our social media life, our cell phone usage, everything that comes with digital media and the digital world. I've been talking a lot about this recently because it is kind of at the forefront of our mind. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book about it, Anxious Generation. I had Joey Odom on the podcast to talk about the RO box. Erin Lochner was on to talk about her book. And you're here to talk about your new book called Look Up, The 30-Day Path to Digital Minimalism and Real Life Maximalism. I'll just put it out there first and foremost. Why was this topic important to you?
So topic was important for two reasons. First reason was this sort of like global perspective where I started noticing that all of my clients were coming in and using their tech in a very specific way. And it was largely to avoid feeling anxious about some situation, whether it was like a social situation, like how do I show up in the elevator and not be awkward, whether it was frustration in those like parenting moments where your toddler won't come out from under the bed and like, oh my God, it is like 10 o'clock at night and you need to go back in your crib. And that sort of frustration that like pulls you to just like, you know what, I'm just going to take a minute and look at Pottery Barn Kids and like see what they have to offer, right? And that pull there. So I started noticing all of my clients using tech to avoid some emotional experience they were feeling, right? And I end up putting a lot of them on some sort of like digital nutrition plan to help us reshape the way that we're engaging with technology. And so I originally had been conceptualizing it as like, oh, this is like a clinical issue. But then when my daughter was born, my first daughter, it was Super Bowl Sunday, and she was at that like cruising age where she was just sort of like toddling along, holding on to the coffee table, hadn't taken her first like free solo step yet. And we were watching Super Bowl. The room is filled with people and friends, and it's lively, and there's so much activity going on. And I had one of those errant thoughts that just show up in our brains. And the thought was, I wonder what Snooki from Jersey Shore is doing. You know, and love Snooki. She's great. Love Jersey Shore. Such a fan. And so naturally, in that moment, it was like, oh, the most important thing is to follow this thought and to see what she is doing right now. Like naturally, this is what we must do. So I started a deep dive on Snooki, which naturally led to the situation. And then is Ronnie in jail? And it just sort of like spiraled down this, like, what are all these people doing now moments? And in that moment, in that spiral, the thing that brought me out was the people in the house started clapping and cheering. And I was like, oh, football is happening. And I looked up and I had actually missed this really important moment, which was my daughter's first step. So she totally just went for it. And I missed it. Right. And most of us as parents, like I saw Sadie's first step, my 2-year-old. I saw that. I don't remember it, but I remember seeing it. I remember I was there for it. With Elsie, I remember missing it. Right. And there's a bit of a sting there. And it had me really start to rethink the way I had been thinking about digital overuse or like smartphone or tablet overuse. And whereas I'd been thinking of it as this like clinical issue, this like avoidance thing. And now I'm also seeing it as this just sort of autopilot thing where we just slide into it. And it doesn't mean that we're doing something intentional to avoid, or it just means that we've got on autopilot, right? And so it was this combination of the two experiences was like, oh, actually, this is a pretty big problem. And I looked into it, and there were some good books out there on like breaking up with your phone, great, love Catherine Price, right? Like great. And there wasn't anything really evidence-based and grounded in like the psychological research to help people change their behavior. And I thought, well, let's make something.
Sure. Yeah. Joey Odom has a similar story about missing his son's soccer goal. And so I do think that that's like just a pain point, light bulb moment for us to want to change behavior, to want to change direction. So I appreciate that story for you. But how else, maybe not even just in your life, but how have you seen it affect your clients' lives with their health, their mental health, and their interpersonal relationships? What are you hearing from people that you talk to?
Mhm. So what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing are two different things. I'm hearing people who are saying that they need to stay plugged in order to be connected or see what's going on, or this is how all of my friends talk, right? So there's this really clear cognitive reasoning to keep doing the behavior. But the impact that it seems to have is that the majority of female identifying persons that I work with are are struggling with some sort of body image thing, right? Like it is virtually impossible to be on these social websites and not compare ourselves to the people that we're seeing or to compare our lives. Men do this too, right? All people do this. We have comparison machines in our heads. They get kicked up, and a really great place to kick that up is in that social media world, right? And so I'm seeing a lot of really detrimental comparisons that we're doing, and it is increasing our anxiety. Am I good enough? Am I living a big enough life? Am I doing cool enough things? Is this worth sharing? Am I beautiful enough? Am I a good enough parent, right? And so there's this thing that's happening that is just like crushing us under anxiety and then exacerbating depressive symptoms, because when you're not doing those things, okay, well, I'm going to get back in bed, I'm going to hide away. I'm going to change what I'm eating. I'm going to try and follow all of these rules that TikTok sets up. I was just working with someone who heard a TikTok rule about not responding to a text message within 30 minutes because you don't want to give the impression that you're too available and you don't want, right? And so it's like there are
Yeah.
all of these like really interesting rules, but what's happening is
Uh-huh.
that this person isn't able to learn how to engage with people, how to
Yeah.
regulate their own emotional experience, or
Mhm.
how to like navigate complicated social situations like a budding romance.
Absolutely. So, okay, I feel like some of the anxiety or overwhelm we feel comes out in negative effects on our physical health. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, it absolutely has a negative impact on our physical health.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of people who are keeping a phone bedside. So it's beyond just blue light is impacting your brain and your
Mhm.
ability to fall asleep.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's happening is you go to sleep, you wake up to pee or because something happens, and then you find yourself using your phone and it just sort of activates you again and again, and it activates that machine. So it's interfering with your sleep. Aside from the fact that it interferes with your posture, a lot of the stress of being good enough impacts how you treat your body, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm seeing a lot of people who are changing their diets based on things that they're seeing online. And they're following these rules that are set out that aren't necessarily vetted rules, these sort of like um, very like pop right now, like TikTok rules, right?
Yeah.
About how to like manage body. And there's a pretty there's a pretty extreme impact on that when you start messing with your weight too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you do talk more about how digital clutter keeps us from being as creative in your book. Talk about some misconceptions about digital habit that your aim is to clarify some of that. But I want to get to the next question I have for you. And this is the
Sure.
30-day challenge that you have. So what are your rules for the 30-day challenge?
So the first and the most important rule for the 30-day challenge is really to be kind to yourself, right? Like it is a 30-day practice of different engaging, behaviorally oriented experiences that allow you to change the relationship with your phone. And that also involves changing the relationship with you. So, like any new habit, you're going to fail sometimes. You're not going to do as great as you think you could or you should, right? And so I think, although I don't think I actually made it the first rule, it might as well be, right? Like when you fail, that's okay. You're a human. We're humans. That's what we do. We slip up and then we try again, right? And so, in taking on this 30-day challenge, moving through it with grace and kindness is the kind of thing that's going to allow you to come back to it, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to talk about how you personally manage your screen time effectively and how that maybe influenced what you were encouraging other people to do. Because I think sometimes we can be
Mhm.
harder on ourselves than what we think is reasonable for other people. So just curious to know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I am brutal on myself. Like speaking of self-kindness, right? I am brutal on myself about my screen use. And so I try to use environmental control strategies that set me up for success, right? So I don't sleep with my phone in the bedroom. It lives in the kitchen. When I'm in the house, I try to put my phone in places where I'm not going to just slide into that autopilot, walk by and check the phone, get sort of swept into it. So I'll put it in the bookshelf like a book. I'll put it on top of our media console where the TV is. So it's just like that's where the screens are. And I don't go over and touch the TV screen. And so I'm unlikely to go touch it there. When I'm driving, I put it in the trunk of the car so that I can't actually access it. But I still
Oh,
have all of the like voice controls, right? It still works. I could still get
wow.
I can still talk to text if I need to, or I can still make phone calls or access my Spotify. So I really try to use environmental control strategies. I think something that is important for me as a parent is that I I keep in mind that my kids don't know what I'm doing in my phone. They
Mhm,
just see me choosing to play with the shiny rectangle instead
mhm,
of them,
mhm,
right? And so anytime they're in the room, I try to put my phone down out of
mhm,
reach
mhm.
and to pay attention to them. And if there's something that I really need to do, occasionally I'll get an email that is actually it's a little bit of a fire. I need to put the fire out, right? As a
Mhm,
therapist, this just sort of happens.
mhm.
I also try not to work with fires too much, but
Mhm.
I whenever any of those moments are happening, I will bring my kiddo in. I'll describe what I'm doing in the moment. Say, "Mommy is wrapping up an email right now. I see you. I love you. Let me just finish this and then I will turn my attention to you 100%."
Mhm.
Right? And so there's something powerful that happens in that, which is
Mhm.
I both acknowledge that they exist, right? And like it is a conversation with them and I'm actively choosing to tend to this email. And there are moments when that moment occurs where I sort of come into that choice point and I recognize that I'm about to choose them over, or I'm about to choose my phone over them. And that's not necessarily a choice I want to make, right? But coming into that choice point helps me to see, like, oh, this is a choice I'm going to make. And so who am I going to choose in this moment? And it gives me a little bit more agency.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking, is that by saying it out loud I saw an Instagram reel about that the other day, making sure if you're gonna pick up your phone to say what you're doing while you're doing it. And it
Mhm.
really is just bringing it back to the prefrontal cortex. Is this really something that I need to be doing? Do I really need to be going down this person from The Bachelor's
Mhm.
route because I'm curious to know what their life is like right now? It probably can be saved for later when I have some downtime, and that's what I choose to do in my downtime. Yeah, I think there is something to be said about speaking things out loud about what it is that we're doing.
Yep. Yep. So that strategy is actually called point and call. It's in the
Oh.
book. It's one of the day's challenges. And it comes from Japanese train conductors. It's a mindfulness practice, right? And so what's actually happening is that by narrating what you're doing throughout the process, you're preventing cognitive errors. And so in Japan, train conductors' errors have gone down, I don't know, something like 98% because they use this strategy. It's really a brilliant experience. And it's, for me, delightfully obnoxious doing it, but I know for a lot of people, it's a very aversive experience narrating all the things that they're doing the whole time.
Okay, I wanna talk about our kids. A lot of our children, our teenagers are
Mm.
also feeling the weight of wanting to be connected. This is where everyone's existing. How can we encourage them to maybe step away, even maybe do their own 30-day challenge?
I love that. So you can do this book with your kids if you want. There will probably be some of the activities that aren't necessarily age appropriate, but this could be a family thing. I'm actually working on a family edition of this book as well. But I think the first step is really modeling that behavior. You know, one of the things that Jonathan Haidt wants us to do is to not give our kids phones until what I think he said 14 or 16. I think it was high
Yeah,
school and then no
yeah.
social media. And and there's something really powerful that happens when we can model the kind of behavior that we want them to see, right? So there might be this thought, um, this feeling of FOMO that like all of our lives are happening in these phones, right? And if all of our lives as parents are happening in the phones, we are just reinforcing that behavior, right? So really the first step to getting our kids off of phones is to model the kind of behavior that we're trying to teach them to do, right? Like I got my first cigarettes from my mom's closet and then I smoked for years, right? And it was a fun thing that we did together, right? And I know a lot of parents use social media time to connect with their kids, and it's also reinforcing that that is how you're connecting, right? So there are other fun things you can do with your tech to connect with your kids that aren't necessarily based in this like social media world and activate that comparison machine. I was talking to somebody the other day and they were talking about how they play Wordle as a family, right? Like they all do the Wordle together and it's this like competition and it's super fun. And then they talk about it at dinner and it's this really engaging activity. That's very different than going through somebody's feed and liking things here and there or sending them a DM or anything like that. And so, so yeah, you can take your kids' devices away, right? Like you can say no to your kids. That's 100% within your capacity to do. And do so knowing that you will be required to have a little bit of distress because telling your kids no kind of sucks, right? And so as long as you're willing to tolerate that distress and not revert back to using your phone to manage your distress, there's a good chance that you're going to teach them how to manage their distress, right? Because if they're using their phone to regulate their own emotions, then they need to learn how not to do that, which means that we need to teach them how to self-regulate.
Yeah, it's the short-term stress of saying no versus the long-term stress of whatever it is that comes with them being addicted, probably addicted to their phones. One of the things that Jonathan Haidt in his book talked about is what does it look like for the collective, the community to all band together and to not make these things so accessible or just for everyday use. It's really cool actually here in Columbus. I've seen numerous schools say this year it's a no phone zone. So I do think that people we're making headway. We are seeing some changes. What are other ways that you would encourage us to, like, as community, as friends, encourage one another or make an effort to get some changes in schools?
Yeah, I think advocating with the PTA is a really, really great starting point. I know that I am doing so with our PTA. Our school system out in Seattle uses tablets and they are of the everybody gets a tablet mindset, which is not my favorite thing at all. And there is some functionality in some of the things that they're using, right? And so I think getting curious about like if your school system is using tablets, right, which a lot of them are, what are the things in here that are absolutely essential? How can we put some sort of device in here that blocks their ability to get into the darker places or even just the mindless distraction places of the internet? How can we keep this a functional thing for our kids in a way that reinforces how we want to use it, right? And so that comes with getting involved at the school. That comes with knowing who's on the PTA, being able to advocate, say things, being involved with other parents at the school. And I recognize that some of these recommendations assume a certain amount of privilege, right? And I don't want that to go unsaid, right? I have a ton of privilege that I'm able to like go to a PTA meeting or talk to other parents at the school. And that's just not the case for a lot of parents, right? And get on a mailing list, ask the teacher questions by email, right? Like get really curious about how devices are being used in the school system and start making a little bit of noise and find out who the other noisemakers are in the school and buddy up, right? Facebook groups are great for that. There's a functionality in this, right? And so again, coming back to this place where it is unrealistic of us to say that we're going to be doing away with all of this. Instead, a better approach is just to go with this like harm reduction model where let's figure out how we can make this the least harmful thing in our lives and how can we make sure that we're using it in a way that's really functional. And so use social media to your advantage to advocate, right? Like use it to connect with this is if you can't like connect in person. Use it to connect with the people who are going to make the most noise and help you make the change that you want to be seen in your schools.
Not even a privileged standpoint, but I think a lot of people are just introverted and they don't want to ruffle feathers. And so, yes, joining together, grab someone that is more extroverted and willing to go to battle. And then that helps build confidence in you too. I think at the end of the day, we all feel passionate, like passionate fighters for our kids. If there's anything to take a stance for, it's for our children. So I think that, yes, bonding together can help, like, just give us that courage to make our voice heard for sure. Well, I feel like we covered quite a bit in your book, but what's one thing that maybe we missed that you'd want to leave to encourage listeners with?
I think that a lot of us know we need to make these changes in our own behavior, right? We see our kids doing it and we're kind of distressed by it, right? We think about what are the long-term effects on them and we're kind of distressed by it, right? Like, I think there's a parallel process happening with us that can be really hard to see from inside of our skin suits, right? Like it's hard to see ourselves from the outside, right? And so if you're questioning it, do I need to make some changes? Would this be beneficial in my life? Maybe check in with your kids. Ask them, do you think I'm on my phone too much? Get their input, right? Like see what they have to say about how you're using your device and be really curious when you do so, right? It's not an inquisition. It's not a put mommy on trial kind of thing. It's a like, do you want me to be here more? Like, can I be here more? And is the phone something that you think is getting in my way of being here? And know that their experience of you is probably going to be very similar to your experience of them using the phone. And I know, like, sitting across the table from a teenager who is in their phone instead of even pretending to make conversation with me, right? That's actually a really painful experience, right? Like, we don't live with each other. We live for each other. And no matter how old your kid is, they want you to pay attention to them, right? And the phone's getting in the way of you doing that. And it's not to say that you're like messing it up or you're, that you are faulty or failed in some way. It's just to say that our brains go on autopilot. These phones are designed to bring us in and immerse us. The tablets are designed the same way, right? And so if that's happening for you, it's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You're working perfectly, right? We just need to get you off of autopilot. And so if you think that's something that you could use some help with, take my 30-day challenge and buy the book and see what happens. Be curious, and your life's going to change in really exciting and curious ways.
Yeah, I think I was talking to someone about this in regards to just the amount of things that we all own and how there's really there's people like me and I guess there's other minimalist books and other minimalists talking about how to declutter. But really, truly, it's new territory because we are one of the first generations with the ability to own so many things. And so moving through that and how to address that and how to address the attachments, I don't think we ever have carried that many possessions in the history of the world. So it's the same thing with phones. We never really knew what it was going to look like to have these things or how addicted we'd become to these devices. And one of the things that Joey said was, we haven't lost hope because we've already made such big changes or we've recognized that there's a problem. Think about cigarettes. People didn't necessarily notice how harmful it could be in affecting your body for many, many years. So I guess just the turnaround of like, okay, here's this thing. Oh, let's turn some of our habits to make a better way for the usage. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it's right on point, right? Like the first step to a huge change is acknowledging that we might have a bit of a problem here. And that's where we are, right? Like more and more people are acknowledging like, this is actually pretty problematic. It's problematic for our kids. It's problematic for us. It's problematic for how we relate to one another, which makes it a problem for all of us, right? Yeah. And if we allow the pain of that to hit us, then we're much more likely to make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where can listeners find you and grab a copy of your book if they want to do so?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on Instagram at Becoming Jennie. You can hit me up at my clinic, westcoastanxiety.com. We serve over 40 different states. And if you are up for the challenge of decluttering your digital life, you can buy my book on Amazon. It's called Look Up, 30-Day Path to Digital Minimalism and Real Life Maximalism. And I hope you take it on. If you do, hit me up. Let me know what your experience was like. I literally cannot wait. I'm going to wait. I will wait 30 days after you do it to
Yeah.
get your feedback. But hit me up at any point. I'd love to chat more about it.
Great. Well, as we wrap things up here, I'm going to ask you the two questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is,
Mm.
what's been a beneficial resource in your life that you want to share with the listeners? This could be a book, documentary, anything that's been a resource to you that was helpful.
The most beneficial resource in my life has been selfcompassion.org. It's Kristen Neff's website. She is a brilliant psychologist, and she researches self-compassion. And adopting these practices into my daily life has informed not only my whole clinical practice and how I move through treatment as a mental health clinician, but it's also impacted and informs how I move through parenting, my journey as a parent, my journey as a woman in this world who is like just trying to like keep her stomach as flat as possible for as long as possible, right? Like Kristen Neff. Yeah, Kristen Neff is brilliant, and there's a lot of brilliant resources on that website. So selfcompassion.org is the spot.
Cool. I'll be sure to include that in the show notes. And then my last question for you is, what is something you can't stop talking about?
Oh gosh, something I can't stop talking about. It is my kids. Like it is my children, frankly. I'm so excited to see them grow and become humans. It is one of the most awe-inspiring and magnificent. Even talking, I get welled up just thinking
Uh-huh.
about like how lucky I am and how lucky they are, like, and how lucky this like family unit is. Like,
Mhm.
what a gift to get to watch humans grow and evolve. Like, they're such beautiful, wonderful little sunflowers. And yeah, seeing them bloom is really, really brilliant.
I have been feeling really nostalgic for probably 18 months to three and a
Mm,
half right now, that season, because I'm out of it at this point.
mm,
And I'm trying so hard not to feel sad about that because I do love every stage. It's like my almost 10-year-old. I love who she is and the books that we read together now. So I'm just trying
mm.
to stay focused on not necessarily mourning it, but just again, watching the growth and the evolution and being grateful for that and not what I have already went through.
I think it's okay to be sad about that too, though.
Yeah.
I think that's just how it is. Whenever there is loss, there is sadness. That the depth of that sadness is just measured by the depth of the love, right? And so as much as you loved that phase is as much as you'll grieve it being gone. I think sadness is totally okay, and maybe even a sign of just how sweet those times were.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a great conversation. Thanks for being another voice in this much needed conversation for change. So I appreciate you writing it and being here today.
Thanks, Anne. Have a great day. And thank you for your work. Keep decluttering and helping people whittle down to the most important things in their lives.
Oh, thank you.